Hi, Simon Sebag Montefiore. Welcome in my home office. You are a British historian and journalist. You have wrote very much books about also about Stalin, which we can see in the background at the court of the Red Tsar. You won the history book of the year prize in the British Book Award, and the Young Stalin, and also the Jerusalem, the biography, which had become a worldwide bestseller. And now you have wrote a collection of letters. You have given us a collection of letters with the English title Writing History, Letters That Changed the World, in German translated by Maria Zentner and published under the title Geschichte, schreiben, Briefe, die die Welt verändern, by Klett-Cotta. Very recently.
There it is. I haven't got a copy yet, but I want one.
You haven't got the copy. I would like to bring it to you at once, but
I've got an English one.
Oh, you got it.
An English one with lots of notes in it. But
yes, you have arranged the letters according to themes. Why did you decide on this classification, such as courage, discovery, war, or power?
Well, first of all, I love letters. I've always wanted to do a collection of letters. I love letters because they're so immediate. They're so authentic, and a lot of my research has been done through letters. I've used letters a lot in all my history books, and so I for years I've been taking notes and saying I want to put this in an anthology, a collection of letters. So that's why I did it. But when I did it, I didn't want it to be chronological, because I think most of my books are chronological, and I wanted to do something different. I think it's more playful, and I think it's nice. I think the most important thing about an anthology is for it to be unexpected, to have things that are very familiar, but also things that are new, and to have them in a strange combination is fun and playful and exciting. And I think that's what an anthology should be.
Mm-hmm. The result of your book is a kind of phenomenology of the letter and also of correspondence. What criteria did you use to select the letters?
The only criteria, really, the book, it's called, Letters That Changed World History or Changed the World. And all of them in some way, I think, are remarkable. But the real criteria is that I like them and I've enjoyed them. And I think other people would share my interest and enjoyment of them. Of course, there are some letters that really did immediately change world history, like, for example, the famous blank check letter from the Kaiser to the Austrians in 1914, for example. And there are several letters like that, or the letters between Khrushchev and Kennedy in 1960 in the Cuban Missile Crisis. But other letters are really more letters that show a new sensibility to developing in some way or other. But the idea is that all of them have an importance, demonstrate a principle, demonstrate a development, whether it's imminent war or the development of female artists, for example.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the writers or the addressees know that letter could appear in such a collection of your book that they will move the world?
Do you think we should? I should ask you a different way of asking that question. Is like, do you think I should be ashamed of putting up very private letters? Because some of these letters were really written. Some of them, as the ones I've just been describing, were letters that were kind of public. Some of them are actually public letters, like J'accuse, for example, by Zola. Some of them are diplomatic letters. Some of them are political letters. But other ones are really very private. They're really erotic letters between lovers. And sometimes I feel a little guilty for putting them in a book.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes your letter are as a look in the private office of the writers, which reflects about their decisions. You choose many letters whose authors were facing fundamental decisions or had even already resigned. Che Guevara to Fidel Castro on 1st April of 1965, or Nicolas Bukharin to Joseph Stalin on 10 December of 1937.
Well, that's an amazing letter. The Bukharin letter is just extraordinary. And you're right, they're both kind of doomed Marxist politicians facing, I mean, Che Guevara leaving to start revolutions in Africa and later South America. But Bukharin, from his jail cell, writes to Stalin, really kind of accepting his own physical destruction for the cause of the communist revolution. So, which is utterly extraordinary, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. No wonder that the letter no wonder that the letter form is always chosen when lovers are separated and can only assure each other of their affection by letter, and the more closely that they are connected with political events, the more content-heavy and meaningful they become. Catherine the Great to Prince Potemkin around 19 March 1774, or Napoleon Bonaparte to Josephine on April 24, 1796.
Yeah, or else there's some of the great letters are the battlefield letters from Napoleon to Josephine at the battlefield of Austerlitz, and also Peter the Great on the battlefield of Poltava, and the Duke of Marlborough to the Duchess of Marlborough. So I love these letters because you can imagine these generals sitting in these kind of battlefields covered in bodies, steaming with gunpowder, and they sit leaning on a door, some peasant cottage's door across two logs, and they write to the whole of Europe declaring that they've won these battles. And then they write to their lovers. And Peter the Great says to Catherine, his lover, he says, come and celebrate. We've won the battle over the Swedes. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The more the sort of personal is interwoven with the political, with the world historical, the more fascinating they are. And there are lots of those in here. And of course, I mean, Catherine the Great and Prince Potemkin, I still think this is, I mean, my first history book was a joint biography of those two. And I worked on those letters myself, the original letters in the Russian archives. And they are the greatest, first of all, it's the greatest political partnership of all history. And secondly, they're the most romantic letters, I think, of all as well.
Mm-hmm. In my introduction on my blog post, I quote, each chapter contains letters from completely different periods, which makes the author's intention all the more clear to show the power of the written word, how letter writers reflect on themselves, but always in relation to the addressee, in which they tell him things they would probably not say to others. It is a dialogue form of the letter as a literary genre. This is thus clarified. Is this right? The dialogue form of the letter can also write history?
Yes, I think you're right on the money there. That's a very good description of what I'm trying to do. I mean, obviously, this is really about a celebration of the written word, of prose, of communication. And I think Lord Byron said, you know, writing a letter is the one time you're on your own, but never alone. And I like this idea. And that's the joy of letters. But of course, I mean, letter is a very wide, there's a very wide definition. You know, it can be someone writing to your plumber to say, come and mend my drains. You know, it can be very practical and very routine. Equally, it can be about great events, great love. And in this book, I try and combine the two, but to show, yes, the wonderful thing about a letter, which is different. There is also a big difference between a letter and a text, for example. There shouldn't be, but there is. And I think the difference is the respect of the writer for the medium is greater in a letter. And therefore, people write letters, especially if they're handwritten, with added depth and care and respect. But actually, it doesn't have to be that way. There's no reason why emails, for example, shouldn't be almost as good as letters, even though they're typed. For example, in this collection, the Leonard Cohen letter, Leonard Cohen's letter to his lover, Marianne, which is in the book, that was an email that he wrote overnight as she was dying. And one should be able to say, it's terrible, it was written on an email, it was typed, it's not a handwritten letter. But it's so beautiful, it's just as good as any of the letters. So there's no reason, I say this to to everybody. There's no reason why you shouldn't write as well as beautifully on an email, for example, or a text, as you do in a handwritten letter.
Mhm. With a letter, you can try to influence the behavior of the addressee, even if it is hopeless. The letter documents the courage of this author and the folly of the addressee. For example, Mahatma Gandhi to Adolf Hitler on December 24, 1940.
Yeah, I mean, that's just an extraordinary letter. I mean, it shows, of course, it shows the naivety of Gandhi in some ways. And Gandhi's an interesting character because, of course, he's a sort of icon, almost a saint of our times, because the idea of non-violent resistance is so admirable. But of course, one forgets that Gandhi's vision failed, in fact, in India. And the story of the partition of India is a story of Gandhi's vision failing and being rejected by the Muslims and the Hindu community. Anyway, but perhaps there's a naivety demonstrated in his letter to Hitler, where he presumes Hitler is a rational politician. Anyway, it's an amazing letter, partly because it's written just before Hitler's kind of real monstrosity became really clear. And so it's a kind of way you could still look at Hitler that way on that date, but not for much longer.
Mhm. Many of these letters are of great interest for historians, because the question is always, how can man intervene in the wheel of history? Does he do it because of the circumstances that seems favorable to him, or is it rather his character, his knowledge, or the way he personally, in relation to the addressee, wants to stand up for something?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big questions, isn't it? And no one has the answer. I mean, I always think it's interesting. Benjamin Disraeli, the British Prime Minister, said assassination changes nothing. For example, about the assassination of President Lincoln. And it may be that assassinations of one individual may not change the vast movements of history, but they can certainly. I don't agree with Disraeli. I think they can certainly change history in the immediate future. One only has to look at, I don't know, the assassination of Lincoln is one example. The assassination of Yitzhak Rabin is another example. There are many examples. All the part Lenin played in the Russian Revolution, or the part Stalin played, to see that there are times when, or Bismarck, for example, there are times when one sees that the individual is actually immensely important. In our own time, look at Trump, So, and of course, Adolf Hitler. So actually, strangely, though it's much more fashionable now to look at history in terms of great economic and great economic movements of economics, of race, of gender, of class, actually, individuals still make a massive difference, don't they? And these letters are, in another way, you're absolutely right, a celebration of that too.
I can formulate this question much more simple, in a much more easier way. When you will convince a friend or somebody about something which is important for you, you prefer an email or a letter?
I prefer a letter. I prefer a letter, but I wouldn't I? I would say that, right?
Mm-hmm. Are there letters which touch you the most in this book?
Well, I mean, I mentioned the Leonard Cohen letter, which I think is very beautiful. See you down the road. The letter of the woman in the Holocaust, who says goodbye to her husband and child, I think is one of the most heartbreaking letters. And when people read it, when I have actors read the letters, sometimes at literary festivals and so on, people cry when they're reading it. And I find it impossible to read without crying. It's just so heartbreaking. So, yeah, I love that. I love those letters. I think that I'm just looking at this. Which are the most, I mean, I love Michelangelo's letter as he's painting the Sistine Chapel. I find that amazing. Of course, he's such a wonderful poet as well. That I find him just such an amazing character. I'm just looking at these to see goodbye. Yes, I mean, I love the letter. I love Hadrian's letter to his successor when he talks about the goodbye, little soul. It's got so full of humor. So I love a lot of these letters actually, and I love the letter of the Caliph of Al-Andalus, who says, "I've only had 14 days of happiness in a reign of 50 years." I think all these letters are about life and transience and living with passion.
I have a bad question. When I say, are we losing something today when we write only mails and tweets? You will say yes, but what did we lose?
Well, I think we lose depth. I think we lose a depth because the trouble with emails and texts is they're shallow, they're unthought out, they're heedless, so they lack depth, they lack thought, they're fatuous often, they're often meaningless or lacking in meaning. And I think there's something about writing a letter by hand that has a special power. And I think it's partly because of something magic happens with a pen and ink, paper, and a communication to someone far away. And there's something almost sacred about the way it's something like you're putting something on record, you're making something that lasts forever. And that creates a sort of respect inside you, inside the writer. So I think, a love letter written on paper is worth 5 times or 10 times what a love letter is in a text. Don't you agree?
Your book also reminds us of letter writing as a cultural technique. After reading your book, I wrote and sent at least 30 letters written by hand.
That's marvelous. I'm so glad you did that. Well done.
You will inspire us to re-begin to write a letter?
I hope it inspires us. And I want it to inspire us. But also there are very good reasons, security reasons to do this. I mean, we now know that, of course, a letter can be copied. And there is no such thing as a private, secret letter forever, as many of the letters in this collection show. But texts and emails can be harvested in their millions by our security agencies, as has happened in England and Germany and in America, not to speak of China or Russia. And so for security purposes, actually a letter is just seen by the receiver usually. And while, for texts or WhatsApps or whatever, millions of people can read them. So there's also there's an aesthetic and emotional reason, but there's also a privacy and security aspect.
We have said that a letter can convince the addressee much more than a simple email, but I found a lack in your book, 2 little lacks.
Okay.
We have not yet spoken about, that's my last question. We have not spoken yet about the form of a letter and the paper, which is also very important.
Good point. Good point. The form, you mean the sort of etiquette? Yes, that's also important. And also the address, the way it's addressed, the beginning of a letter, you could say hi. Normally in emails you say hi, but in letters you normally say dear or darling or dearest. And then paper, thick, luscious paper. And also you haven't mentioned a pen, the importance of the pen.
Yes, that's it. I have also a pen, a real pen for a letter.
Pen,
yes,
very important. So yeah, so I think
that is this one.
See.
This is
Beautiful.
this
Ooh,
one for
yeah,
to write. That's it. And the paper, I make no publicity, but I also buy the paper of course Mühle with 90 gram.
90 grams.
Which
Well,
is
very important. These things are all important because ritual is everything in life. And it's, as I said, it's a sacred experience to write a letter, and even more sacred with the right paraphernalia. Just like a church service, it's important. In a Catholic church, you have the incense and the biscuits and so on, the wine. And in letter writing, you know, the ink, the pen, the paper, all of this is important. The table, the view.
Yes, and there's a third aspect that's not a lack in your book, but because you have fulfilled it very, very well. But I will insist on it. The letters, for example, all the letters of my father who died in 2001. There, with these letters, he spoke to me today.
Oh, yeah, that's so nice. Well, that's the point. With a letter, you live forever.
That's it.
That's a good place. That's a good place to finish.
Who should read your book?
Well, it's really written to be read by everybody. You don't need to know any history. You don't need to know about literature, but many of the great writers, you know, Balzac and Zola, and you know, many of them are in here. Chekhov are in the book. You don't need to know anything, but these are letters that everyone should know, and you'll find out a lot about love, a lot about sex, and a lot about history and art from reading this book. So it's the sort of book you can just dip into. You can read it in the bar, on a plane, and I hope it gives everyone a lot of pleasure, because I've loved creating it for you.
Thank you very much. Simon Sebag Montefiore, Geschichte schreiben, Briefe, die die Welt verändern. Das Buch ist gerade bei Klett-Cotta erschienen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.